The radio static cut through the silence like a knife. 3 sharp bursts, followed by nothing. I pressed my earpiece deeper, straining to catch any fragment of Bravo Team's transmission, but all I got was the empty hiss of dead air. That was the moment I knew we were walking into something that would change everything we thought we understood about warfare. The briefing had been routine enough. Intelligence suggested a high-value Taliban commander was using a network of caves in the Spin Boldak region, roughly 15 clicks southwest of Kandahar airfield. Our unit, Charlie Company's recon platoon, had been tasked with a standard night reconnaissance mission to confirm the location and assess enemy strength before a larger operation could be green-lit. What made this different was the local intel. Our Afghan interpreter, Mahmoud, had pulled me aside after the mission brief, his weathered face creased with worry lines deeper than usual. "Sergeant Mitchell," he'd whispered, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. "The villages near those caves, they have been empty for 3 weeks now. The people, they speak of something that hunts in the darkness, something that is not Taliban, not American, not human." I dismissed it as local superstition at the time. After 18 months in country, you learned to filter the signal from the noise when it came to local stories. But now, crouched behind a rocky outcropping with my rifle scope trained on the cave entrance 200 meters below, that conversation felt a lot more relevant. The mission had started standard. 4-man team, myself as team leader, Corporal Davis on point, Specialist Rodriguez with the radio, and Private First Class Chen covering our 6. We'd inserted via helicopter at 2200 hours, landed in a dried riverbed 3 clicks from the target area, and moved overwatch positions throughout the night. The first sign something was wrong came at 0130 hours. Rodriguez had been monitoring enemy frequencies when he picked up what sounded like screaming on one of the Taliban's known channels. Not the screaming of someone under fire. I'd heard plenty of that. This was different. Raw terror mixed with something that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Could be psychological warfare," Davis had suggested, adjusting his night vision goggles. "Maybe they're torturing prisoners." But Rodriguez shook his head, fine-tuning the radio. "Negative, Sergeant. This isn't coming from their usual positions. Signals originating from somewhere north of our location, maybe 2 clicks out." That's when we lost contact with Bravo Team. They'd been positioned on the northern ridge, providing overwatch for our approach route. Staff Sergeant Morrison was a 15-year veteran who'd never missed a scheduled check-in, but when 0200 hours rolled around, their radio went silent. Not powered down, not damaged, just empty. I made the call to continue the mission. We had a job to do, and for all we knew, Bravo was maintaining radio silence for operational reasons. But as we moved closer to the cave complex, the landscape itself seemed to change around us. The temperature dropped first. Afghanistan in October could get cold at night, but this was different. A bone-deep chill that seemed to leach warmth from your core, despite the physical exertion of moving through rocky terrain. Rodriguez noticed it too, his breath coming out in visible puffs that shouldn't have been possible given the ambient temperature readings on our equipment. Then came the tracks. Chen spotted them first, pressed into soft sand between 2 boulders about 50 meters from the cave entrance. At first glance, they looked almost human, bipedal, roughly the right size. But the spacing was wrong, too wide for normal stride length, and when I knelt down with my red-filtered flashlight for a closer look, I felt my blood run cold. The impressions were deep, deeper than they should have been for something moving on 2 legs. But what really bothered me were the claw marks. Long, parallel grooves extending from what would have been the toes, scoring the hard-packed earth like it was soft clay. "Could be some kind of local wildlife," Rodriguez whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. Maybe a large cat or... "Cats don't walk upright," Davis cut him off, scanning the surrounding rocks with his rifle. "And they sure as hell don't leave tracks this size." I was photographing the prints with my tactical camera when the first howl echoed across the valley. It started low, almost subsonic, a sound you felt in your chest before your ears registered it. Then it climbed in pitch, becoming something between a wolf's howl and a human scream, lasting nearly 10 seconds before cutting off abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound itself. "Contact north!" Chen hissed, dropping to one knee and bringing his M4 to bear on the ridgeline where Bravo team should have been positioned. But as we watched through our scopes, nothing moved on that ridge. No muzzle flashes, no movement, no signs of life at all. The howl had come from somewhere beyond it, somewhere in the deep desert darkness. That's when I noticed our equipment starting to malfunction. Rodriguez's radio began cycling through frequencies on its own, producing bursts of static mixed with what sounded like voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. My GPS unit showed our location jumping randomly across the display, placing us everywhere from downtown Kandahar to coordinates that didn't exist on any map. "Sergeant," Davis called softly, "you need to see this." He was pointing at the cave entrance, and what I saw there made every instinct I'd developed in 3 combat deployments scream at me to abort the mission. The cave mouth was roughly 12 feet high and 8 feet wide, carved into the limestone face of a low cliff. What had looked like natural shadows from our distant observation post were revealed, up close, to be something else entirely. The rock around the entrance wasn't weathered by time and wind. It was scored with the same claw marks we'd found in the tracks, only these were massive, gouged deep into solid stone. But that wasn't what made Davis call me over. There were bones scattered around the cave entrance, lots of them. Some were obviously animal, goats, sheep, maybe a few wild dogs. Others were harder to identify, white and sun-bleached, arranged in patterns that seemed almost ritualistic. And there, half buried in the sand near the cave mouth, I spotted something that made my stomach drop. A piece of military equipment. American military equipment. I approached carefully, motioning for the team to maintain overwatch positions. The object was partially buried, but enough was visible to identify it as a night vision mount, the kind attached to advanced tactical helmets. The serial numbers were still readable, and when I ran them through my field reference guide, my blood went cold. The equipment belonged to a special forces team that had gone missing in this region 6 months earlier. Officially, they'd been listed as KIA in an IED attack, but their bodies were never recovered. "Sergeant," Rodriguez whispered urgently, "I'm picking up movement signatures on thermal. Multiple contacts, approximately 100 meters north and closing." I switched my rifle to thermal imaging and immediately saw them, heat signatures moving through the rocks with an odd, loping gait. There were at least 6, maybe 8, and they were definitely bipedal, but their movement pattern was wrong. Too fluid, too fast, like they were flowing across the terrain rather than running over it. "Fall back to secondary position," I ordered. But before we could move, the sound started. It began as a low rumbling, like distant thunder, but it was coming from beneath our feet. The ground itself was vibrating, small pebbles jumping and dancing on the rocky surface. Then came the voices. Human voices, calling out in English with American accents. But they were coming from inside the cave, and the words were all wrong. "Help us. Please. We're trapped in here. Can anybody hear us?" Rodriguez's face went white. "That's Morrison's voice," he whispered. "That's Staff Sergeant Morrison." But Morrison was supposed to be on the northern ridge with Bravo team, not trapped inside a cave 2 clicks away. And his voice was coming from multiple directions at once, echoing strangely as if the cave system was much larger than it appeared. The thermal signatures were getting closer, now less than 50 meters out. I could see them more clearly now, tall, humanoid shapes moving with predatory grace through the rocks. But their heat signatures were inconsistent, flickering in and out like dying flames. "Contact front," Davis called out. But when I looked where he was aiming, I saw something that defied every briefing, every training exercise, every combat experience I'd ever had. The creatures emerging from the rocks weren't entirely solid. They seemed to shift between states, sometimes appearing as tall, gaunt humanoids with elongated limbs and glowing eyes, other times looking almost like shadow-given form. Their movement was unnaturally smooth, feet if they were feet, never quite seeming to touch the ground. Chen opened fire first, his M4 chattering in controlled 3-round bursts. I watched his tracers pass right through the lead creature without effect, striking the rocks behind it and sending sparks flying. The thing didn't even slow down. "Rounds aren't connecting!" he shouted, ejecting his magazine and slamming in a fresh one. "It's like shooting at smoke!" But they weren't entirely incorporeal. One of them brushed against a boulder as it passed, and I heard the distinct sound of claws scraping against stone. Whatever these things were, they existed in our world enough to leave physical traces, but not enough to be stopped by conventional weapons. The voices from the cave were getting louder now, more urgent. I could make out individual words, calls for help mixed with tactical radio chatter. But underneath it all was something else. A sound like laughter, cold and inhuman, and filled with a malice that made my skin crawl. Rodriguez grabbed my arm, his eyes wide with terror. "Sergeant, my radio's picking up our own transmissions, from 3 hours ago. It's playing back our insertion, our movement to target, like something's been recording us." The implications of that hit me like a physical blow. These things, whatever they were, had been watching us since we'd landed. They knew our route, our tactics, our equipment. They'd been herding us toward this cave like livestock to slaughter. That's when I realized the truth about Bravo Team. The voices calling from inside the cave weren't Morrison and his men trapped and calling for help. They were bait. These creatures had somehow captured or absorbed their voices, their memories, their knowledge, and were using them to lure us into the same fate. "Fall back now," I ordered. But as we turned to retreat, more heat signatures appeared on our flanks. We were surrounded. The creatures were closing in from 3 directions, moving with that same fluid, otherworldly grace. Up close, I could see them more clearly. Tall as men, but wrong in proportions, with limbs that bent at angles that shouldn't have been possible. Their faces were the worst part, human enough to be recognizable but distorted, as if someone had tried to recreate human features from a half-remembered description. And their eyes held intelligence. Cold, calculating, predatory intelligence that had been watching and learning and planning for far longer than we'd been in this valley. Davis fired a full magazine at the nearest one, his rounds passing harmlessly through its form. But when it reached out toward him, its claws, very real, very solid claws, raked across his body armor, leaving deep gouges in the ceramic plates. "They can hurt us, but we can't hurt them," Rodriguez shouted over the growing cacophony of voices echoing from the cave. The voices were getting more desperate now, more convincing. I could hear my own voice among them, calling out coordinates for an extraction that would never come. Chen was backing toward the cave mouth, his rifle trained on the approaching creatures. "Sergeant, what do we do? Standard tactics aren't working." I looked at the cave entrance, with its scored stone and scattered bones, and made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Sometimes in combat, you're faced with choices where every option leads to disaster. This was one of those moments. "Into the cave," I ordered. It might be our only chance to break contact. The protests were immediate and loud, but I cut them off. "Look around. We're surrounded by things that can't be killed but can definitely kill us. The cave is the only direction they're not coming from." It was flawed logic born from desperation, but as the creatures closed to within 20 meters, flawed logic was all we had. We moved toward the cave entrance in tactical formation, weapons trained outward, even though we knew they were useless against our pursuers. The moment we crossed the threshold into the cave, everything changed. The temperature dropped another 20 degrees, and the air became thick, almost viscous, like breathing liquid. Our footsteps echoed strangely, multiplying and distorting until it sounded like an entire platoon was moving through the tunnels. The beam from my tactical flashlight seemed dimmer, struggling to penetrate darkness that felt almost solid. Behind us, the creatures had stopped at the cave mouth. They weren't following us in, which should have been reassuring, but somehow made everything worse. It meant they didn't need to chase us anymore. It meant we'd gone exactly where they wanted us to go. The cave system was vast, far larger than our external reconnaissance had suggested. Tunnels branched off in multiple directions, some sloping downward into deeper darkness, others angling upward toward what might have been other entrances. The walls were covered in the same claw marks we'd seen outside, but these were arranged in patterns, almost like writing in some alien script. Rodriguez's radio was going crazy now, cycling through dozens of frequencies and picking up transmissions in languages I'd never heard. Mixed in with the alien chatter were fragments of English, military communications from operations that had taken place months or even years ago. I heard pilots calling in airstrikes on coordinates that didn't match any maps, infantry units reporting casualties from enemies that didn't exist, commanders issuing orders for missions that had never been authorized. "It's like the cave is some kind of recording device," Rodriguez whispered, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "Everything that happens in this region, it's all being stored somehow." We moved deeper into the cave system, following the main tunnel because staying put seemed worse than moving forward. The voices were all around us now, not just from Rodriguez's radio, but emanating from the walls themselves. Some were in English, others in languages I recognized as Arabic, Pashto, Russian, even what sounded like Vietnamese. How many military units had stumbled into this place over the years? How many soldiers from how many armies had walked these same tunnels, never to be seen again? Davis stopped suddenly, his flashlight beam fixed on something ahead. "Contact front," he called softly, but his voice lacked the urgency of enemy contact. This was something else. What we found in that widening chamber will stay with me until the day I die. Bodies. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, arranged in neat rows like they were sleeping. But they weren't decomposed. They looked fresh, preserved somehow in the cave's unnatural atmosphere. American soldiers, Russian Spetsnaz, British SAS, Afghan Mujahideen, Taliban fighters, uniforms from different conflicts spanning decades, all mixed together in this underground graveyard. But they weren't dead. Not exactly. As our lights played across their faces, I saw eyes tracking our movement, mouths opening and closing in silent words, fingers twitching as if trying to reach for weapons that were no longer there. They were aware, conscious, but trapped somehow in bodies that no longer fully belonged to them. Chen was backing away, his rifle shaking in his hands. "What is this place? What happened to them?" Before I could answer, Rodriguez grabbed my arm. His radio had locked onto a clear signal, and through the static came a voice I recognized. Staff Sergeant Morrison, clear as if he were standing next to us. "Charlie team, This is Bravo Leader. We have eyes on the target. Initiating final approach. But Morrison's body was 20 feet away, lying among the other preserved soldiers, his eyes staring directly at us with an expression of desperate warning. The voice continued. Something's wrong here, Mitchell. The caves. They're not what they seem. Don't trust anything you hear. Don't believe anything you see. Get out while you still can. Then the signal cut to static, and the bodies in the chamber began to move. They rose slowly, joints creaking like old hinges, movements jerky and unnatural. But their eyes held awareness, personality, the essence of who they'd been in life. They were trying to warn us, trying to communicate, but their voices came out as the same inhuman howls we'd heard in the valley. That's when I understood the true horror of our situation. These creatures we'd encountered outside. They weren't some unknown species or supernatural entities. They were the collected essence of everyone who'd ever died in this place. Their memories and experiences absorbed and twisted into something hungry and predatory. The cave wasn't just a recording device. It was a feeding ground. And we had walked directly into its maw. The preserved soldiers were reaching toward us now, not with aggression, but with desperate pleading. They wanted us to understand something, to learn from their fate, but their transformed vocal cords could only produce those terrifying howls that had first alerted us to the danger. Davis was hyperventilating, his tactical discipline finally cracking under the weight of what we were witnessing. "This isn't possible," he kept repeating. "None of this is possible." But Rodriguez was studying his radio with the focused intensity of a man trying to solve a puzzle under extreme pressure. "Sergeant," he said slowly, "I'm picking up a pattern in the transmissions. The voices, the languages, the time signatures. It's like they're trying to tell us something." I forced myself to focus on his words, despite the nightmare surrounding us. The mission had gone far beyond reconnaissance or intelligence gathering. Now it was about survival, about getting out with enough information to prevent other units from suffering the same fate. "What kind of pattern?" I asked, keeping my rifle trained on the approaching figures, even though I knew conventional weapons were useless here. Rodriguez fine-tuned his radio, isolating different frequency bands. "The English transmissions are all giving coordinates, different locations, different times, but they all point to other sites like this one, other feeding grounds." The implications were staggering. If Rodriguez was right, this wasn't an isolated phenomenon. There were other places, other caves or structures or geographic anomalies where the same thing was happening. Military units from various nations and time periods, all being drawn into these supernatural traps. Chen had backed against the cave wall, his eyes wide with terror as he watched the preserved soldiers shuffling toward us. "How do we fight something like this? How do we get out?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Morrison's body had stopped moving, but his lips were forming words. I couldn't hear them over the ambient noise, but I could read lips well enough to make out the message. "Deeper, go deeper, find the source." It went against every tactical instinct I'd ever developed, but Morrison had been a solid soldier and team leader. If his trapped consciousness was trying to guide us, maybe it was our only chance. "We go deeper," I announced, shouldering my pack and checking my ammunition, even though I knew bullets were worthless here. "Stay together. Watch each other's backs, and whatever happens, don't get separated." The tunnel leading deeper into the cave system was narrower, forcing us to move in single file. The walls here were covered not just with claw marks, but with what looked like carved symbols, intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change when you weren't looking directly at them. The voices were louder here, layered upon each other until they became a constant background noise of military communications from different eras and nations. I heard Soviet commanders planning operations in Afghanistan, American pilots calling in strikes during Desert Storm, British officers coordinating movements in the Falklands. How far back did this thing's influence reach? How many conflicts had been affected by soldiers disappearing into places like this? The tunnel opened into another chamber. This one smaller, but dominated by something that defied explanation. In the center of the space was what looked like a pool of liquid darkness, perfectly circular, and so black it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The surface didn't move like water. It was perfectly still, like looking into a hole cut through reality itself. Rodriguez's radio was screaming now, every frequency active simultaneously, voices overlapping in dozens of languages. But there was a pattern, a rhythm to the chaos that suggested intelligence behind it. "It's trying to communicate," he said, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. "All these voices, all these memories, they're part of something larger. Something that's been here much longer than humans have been fighting wars." The dark pool began to change, its surface rippling despite the absence of any disturbance. Images formed in the liquid darkness, military operations from throughout history, soldiers from different eras and nations, all ending the same way. Units going missing, investigations finding nothing, the cycle repeating endlessly. But there was something else in the images, something that connected all these incidents across time and geography. In each case, before the disappearances began, there had been reports of archaeological discoveries, ancient ruins, buried artifacts, sites that predated known civilization. It's not random, I realized aloud. These feeding grounds aren't natural phenomena. They're built on something older, something that was here before humans started making war. The pool showed us more, underground complexes that stretched for miles, connected by tunnels that ran beneath entire continents. A network of these places, all serving the same function, all feeding the same hungry intelligence that had been studying human conflict for millennia. Chen was staring at the images with the expression of a man watching his own execution. How do we stop something like this? How do we even report it? The answer came from the pool itself. The images shifted, showing us the path we'd taken to reach this chamber. But they also showed us something else. Another way out. A tunnel that led not back to the surface, but to a different part of the complex. A part where the entity that controlled this place was more vulnerable. "It's showing us the way," Rodriguez said, his radio finally falling silent. "But why would it help us?" The answer came in the form of more images, other military units that had made it this far, soldiers who had chosen to go deeper rather than try to escape. Some had succeeded in damaging the entity, weakening its hold on this place. Others had become part of its collection. But all of them had learned the truth. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about preventing future incidents, about finding a way to warn others or destroy the entity's ability to lure more soldiers to their deaths. I made the decision that would either save us or doom us. We follow the path it's showing us. We find this thing's source and we do whatever damage we can. The tunnel the pool had revealed was hidden behind what looked like solid rock, but when we approached it, the stone became translucent, allowing us to pass through. The passage beyond was different from the others. Smoother, more deliberate in its construction, carved by intelligence rather than natural forces. As we moved deeper, the voices began to change. Instead of random military communications, we started hearing something else, the thoughts and memories of the entity itself. Ancient beyond human comprehension, It had been studying warfare since the first humans picked up weapons against each other. It fed not just on the physical essence of soldiers, but on their experiences, their tactical knowledge, their understanding of human conflict. Every unit that disappeared into places like this made it smarter, more capable of predicting and countering human military tactics. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber that defied the cave's external dimensions. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above us, and the floor stretched away in all directions, covered with what looked like organic machinery. Pulsing conduits ran along the walls, carrying some kind of luminescent fluid that provided the only light in the space. At the center of it all was something that my mind struggled to process. It wasn't quite organic and wasn't quite mechanical, but it was clearly alive and clearly intelligent. Thousands of tendrils extended from a central mass, each one connected to what looked like monitoring stations displaying information in symbols I couldn't read. But I could read the screens that displayed human languages. Tactical assessments, unit compositions, strategic analyses, all based on the memories and experiences of the soldiers it had absorbed over the years. It was building a database of human military capabilities, learning how to predict and counter every tactic in our arsenal. Rodriguez's radio crackled to life one last time, and through the static came a message in clear English. "You have seen the truth. You understand the purpose. Join us willingly, and your knowledge will help preserve your species. Resist, and you will join us anyway. But your essence will be damaged in the process." The choice it was offering us was no choice at all. Become part of its collection willingly or be absorbed by force. But there was a third option, one the entity hadn't considered because no human unit had ever made it this far with their equipment intact. Chen still had his demolition charges, enough C4 to bring down a small building. Rodriguez had managed to maintain contact with base despite everything, and while his regular radio was compromised, his emergency beacon was still functional. Davis had a targeting laser that could guide precision strikes if anyone was listening, and I had something the entity couldn't absorb or counter: pure human stubbornness, and the absolute refusal to let this thing continue feeding on my brothers in arms. The entity sensed our intentions as soon as we began to act. The tendrils writhed with increased activity, and the organic machinery began pulsing faster. Alarms that sounded like screaming voices echoed through the chamber as it realized these particular prey animals were fighting back. Chen was already placing charges on what looked like critical junction points in the alien machinery. Rodriguez had activated his beacon and was calling for immediate air support on every frequency his radio could access. Davis was painting targets with his laser, hoping someone topside was monitoring for targeting information. The entity retaliated by flooding our minds with the absorbed memories of every soldier who had died in this place. Suddenly I was experiencing a dozen different firefights simultaneously, feeling the pain and terror of men who had died years or decades ago. The psychological assault was designed to overwhelm us, to break our will to resist. They came through passages I hadn't seen, flowing like liquid shadow across the organic floor. But here, in the heart of their master's domain, they were fully solid, fully real, and fully capable of tearing us apart with claws that could score solid stone. The first wave hit us as Chen was arming the last of his charges. Davis opened fire with armor-piercing rounds, and this time they had effect. The creatures screamed as the bullets tore through their forms, but for every one that fell, 2 more took its place. Rodriguez was still calling for air support, but the entity was jamming all frequencies except its own. The only message getting through was the beacon's automated distress signal, broadcasting our GPS coordinates on a frequency that penetrated all interference. I found myself back to back with Chen, emptying magazine after magazine into the approaching horde. The creatures were learning from each engagement, adapting their tactics in real time based on the absorbed memories of human soldiers. They began using cover, coordinating their attacks, employing battlefield tactics against us. "Charges are set," Chen shouted over the gunfire. 30 seconds. But 30 seconds might as well have been 30 minutes. The creatures were closing in from all sides, and our ammunition was running low. The entity itself was beginning to move, its massive bulk shifting as tendrils reached toward us with obvious hostile intent. That's when the ceiling exploded. The cavalry arrived in the form of an AC-130 gunship that had been monitoring Rodriguez's beacon signal. The 105mm howitzer rounds punched through solid rock like it was paper, creating a hole large enough for the aircraft's other weapons to engage targets inside the chamber. The 40mm Bofors gun began systematically destroying the organic machinery, while the 25mm Gatling gun swept the chamber floor, cutting down creatures with precision that suggested the aircraft's crew could somehow see through the interference. The entity screamed, not through the radio or the cave's acoustic properties, but directly into our minds. The psychic shriek of something ancient and predatory, facing its own mortality for the first time in millennia. Chen's charges detonated in sequence, each explosion triggering secondary blasts as alien machinery overloaded and failed. The chamber filled with smoke and falling debris as the entity's control over the complex began to collapse. "Move!" I shouted, leading the team toward what looked like a partially collapsed tunnel. Behind us, the AC-130 was pouring fire into the wounded entity, each hit producing that mind-splitting scream of rage and pain. We ran through passages that were shaking themselves apart, dodging falling rocks and collapsing support structures. The voices that had filled the cave system were fading, replaced by something that might have been the death rattle of something impossibly old.